Good evening. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today for a very, very special event. I'm Ivo Daalder, President of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you. 2 years ago today, we at the Council closed our doors to in-person programming and indeed to working in the office because of some disease that was running around. But today, we are once again opening our doors, and indeed for a very special occasion that turns out only comes around once every 100 years, which is our 100th anniversary. And I'm just thrilled that we're able to do this in person, just with all of you. Now, I'm not going to make you sing Happy Birthday, Chicago Council on Global Affairs, but I'm not going to stop you either. No, all right. Let me begin here by thanking our distinguished honorees, President Barack Obama and Yo-Yo Ma, for joining us for this milestone event. It's indeed a special day that we can welcome two such extraordinary individuals to Chicago and to the Council, and we're extremely grateful for them being here with us tonight. Let me also, on behalf of the Council, express my extraordinary gratitude and appreciation for your extraordinary generosity, for all the people who are sitting in this room and who are also beyond the room and not able to be here with us today, who have supported our Second Century campaign and this centennial celebration. Your confidence in and support of the Council has made everything we do possible over the last 100 years, and it will allow us to continue to grow, to thrive, and to inspire so many others over the next 100 years. So thank you. Before the evening is out, Jenny Scanlon, one of our vice chairs and also one of our Centennial Celebration chairs, will share with you the details about how successful we have been in the campaign. But let me tell you, it's been a major success. And again, thanks for that. Let me also recognize and thank our entire Council staff for all their dedication and hard work, not only today or in the last week or last year, but really throughout the 100-year history of the Council. It is that behind-the-scenes work that makes the Council and all it does possible. So please join me in thanking them for this special occasion. I'm pleased to see that Mayor Lightfoot is here and Congressman Quigley. We truly appreciate your recognition of the importance of this event for the Council by being with us here tonight. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. And I'm also grateful that former Council Presidents John Riley and Marshall Bouton are with us here today. Together, the three of us, believe it or not, were leading the Council for the 50 of the past 100 years, although one a little longer than the other two. Tonight I'll say a few words about our past, but I'm excited that each of you can walk out with your own copy of Dick Longworth's excellent history of our institution. It sure helps to have one of the greatest foreign correspondents on the team when you need to document 100 years in less than 300 pages. Dick has done an amazing work, and thank you for a tremendous and lively account. The Council has evolved over its first century, reflecting changes in taste and topics and technology. In the early years, this institution was unabashedly elitist, the smoke-filled domain of the city's business leaders. Though, and we are very proud of this, from the very outset, women played a key role as both founders, leaders, and members of this organization. Later, in the 60s and the 70s, the Council operated a widely popular travel service. For a while, we even offered the cheapest ticket from Chicago to Europe. Some of you may even remember that, but I'm not going to call you out on that. For decades, our Young Professional Network events have been known throughout the city as places for globally minded young people, young singles to mingle, and more. Some of you may remember the early days of that too, and I am not going to call you out on that either. Throughout the Council's growth and evolution, one thing, however, has been constant: our mission to help Chicagoans and Americans understand and engage with the world, to help advance solutions to the many global challenges that we in this city, we in this country, and we in this world face together. At one of the Council's earliest meetings, the great statesman and probably our most prominent president, Adlai Stevenson, described his purpose in terms that would not seem out of place today if you were to click on our website. Faced with instability in Europe and Asia, sound familiar? Stevenson said the following: "The intelligent thing to do is to inform ourselves as accurately as possible. The purpose of the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, as we were then called, is not only to stimulate interest in these questions, but to provide reliable information and the opportunity for unprejudiced discussion of those issues. The people are different, the technology is different, except for ballrooms like these, the venues are different, but the goal of informing and engaging with the public on critical global issues endures for the Council. Indeed, in this age of misinformation, the need for an independent, nonpartisan organization that can help make people make sense of the world is as vital as ever. In fact, if not more so. Today, we meet against the backdrop of a devastating war in Ukraine. The invasion of a sovereign state by an authoritarian aggressor recalls some of the darkest days of European history. Just as during the interwar period, or the Vietnam era, or after 9/11, Americans and Chicagoans are once again eager to discuss what events abroad mean for them here at home and what America needs to do in response. We're here for those conversations. We've always been here. In 2006, under Marshall, the Council expanded its scope beyond foreign relations to global affairs so we could engage in issues beyond the realm of war and peace. The global economy, human rights, food security, cities, climate change, equity, and inclusion. There are many lenses through which we can understand the world of disorienting change, and at the Council, we use all of them. As your children and grandchildren deal with these issues in the coming years, we'll be here to help them understand what it all means, just as we have always been here over the past 100 years for you and your parents and grandparents. As we turn to our second century, the Council is building an organization that is broad and nimble enough to serve not only our members here in Chicago, like you, but also a growing and national global audience. Web streaming, social media, podcast, video storytelling we have the communication platforms that would have been beyond the wildest imagination of the Council's founders, or even many of us even just a few years ago. And we're proud to say that our transition to becoming a digital think tank will allow us to represent Chicago and the Midwest on a scale with a scope and at a speed that we have never been able to do before. But we'll continually do so representing all that is best of the values of the Midwest: common sense and openness, tolerance and resilience. Our convening efforts are known the world over as a reliable place for depth and truth, and we're going to keep it that way. Our centers of excellence, the Pritzker Forum on Global Cities, the Global Food and Agricultural Program, the Lester Crown Center on U.S. Foreign Policy, help advance thinking and policy on the issues that tie the Midwest to the world and the world back to the Midwest. As we stand on the brink of a second century, it is vital that we not only look back to the past or the present, but also towards the future. From its very beginning, the Council thought not only about the leaders of today, but also the leaders of tomorrow, many of whom, I'm very glad to say, are in this room here tonight. The challenges they face are no less severe than those our founders faced in 1922. Great power competition, even war. Populism, rapid technological change, deep inequality, on top of which they also face the burden of a climate and ecological disaster that is of our own making. Which is why it is critical that the Council continue to hear their voices and provide them opportunities to lead. That's what we will continue to do for as long as we are around. And so we're fortunate that we have President Obama and Yo-Yo Ma with us tonight, as I know that they too care deeply about investing in our future leaders. So with that, let me turn to our program for tonight. We will spend a few moments getting to know our guests, and therefore let me start by first saying that we are incredibly fortunate to have Carol Marin with us this evening to guide the conversation between our honorees. Carol, as all of you know, is an award-winning reporter whose work spans NBC5 in Chicago, WTTW, as well as CBS and 60 Minutes. And she currently directs the DePaul University Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence. Carol has a very personal connection to the Council. Her father-in-law, Clifton Utley, the noted radio and early television news anchor, led the Council in a truly critical time from 1931 to 1942. Carol will be out on the stage in a moment. First, I'm pleased to welcome onto the stage Faye Hartog-Levin to say a few words about Yo-Yo Ma. In addition to serving as our distinguished ambassador to the Netherlands under President Obama, Faye has long been a vital member of the Council family. We're especially indebted to her extraordinary support for the Second Century Campaign and the Centennial Celebration, and for her role as a chair of the Centennial, a board member, and a distinguished fellow at the Council. Please join me in welcoming Faye Hartog-Levin.
Thank you, Ivo. Only Ivo can say my Dutch name with such a great Dutch accent. Good evening. I'm delighted and honored to be here this evening to celebrate the Council's centennial with so many friends. After my career in Chicago and being part of the diplomatic service abroad, I appreciated the importance and uniqueness of the Council on Global Affairs. In addition to the breadth of its content and research, what really sets this organization apart is its accessibility. We are a public engagement organization whose content is shared freely or at a minimal cost. We do not operate behind paywalls or in private venues. The opportunity to engage with global issues through this content and through the Council's Next Generation initiatives has created a community of globally minded people with whom I am proud and eager to be associated. And we are blessed, as you could see, with a talented leader in Ivo Daalder, whose insights are appreciated and disseminated broadly through public, private, and social media. Our council community is drawn from a broad cross-section of this city's population. We understand and care deeply about global issues. Our hope is that as the council's influence continues to grow, we can help build more understanding and serve as an antidote to the division we see in our political discourse here and around the world. Connecting people across borders and bridging cultural divides has been central to the work of our first honoree this evening, Yo-Yo Ma. We know Yo-Yo Ma's biography, the awards and accolades he has won, the presidents and world leaders for whom he has performed, and his role as a U.S. messenger of peace. But Yo-Yo Ma also has strong connections to our city. He spent many years with another great Chicago civic institution, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, where he served as a creative consultant. In 2019, Ma participated in the International Day of Action Against Violence in Chicago as part of his Bach Project initiative. Of that project, Ma said, "If we're ever to unite the United States, it's going to be through what happens in Chicago. We deserve to do everything we can to stop the violence and to make everybody thrive." And just this week, Yo-Yo Ma set up his cello on the sidewalk in front of the Russian embassy in Washington and played in protest over the Ukraine war. Tonight, we honor Yo-Yo Ma's dedication to building connections and fostering peaceful dialogue across divides in our city and around the world. Thank you, Yo-Yo Ma. Before Yo-Yo Ma and Carol Marin join us, it's my pleasure to welcome Lester Crown to the stage. Lester Crown represents the very best of Chicago's civic leaders. He is a friend to many, and it was Lester who introduced me to the council when I returned from The Hague. He has invested so much into Chicago's growth as a global city, not the least of which is the Council's Foreign Policy Center of Excellence. Thank you, Lester, for all that you do for the city and for the Council on Global Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Lester Crown to the stage.
Thank you, Faye. And hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure seeing all of you. I guess after 2 years, it's a pleasure seeing anybody. You know, as you all can imagine, it's really a signal honor to be asked to introduce President Obama. But I was most concerned on how I would do it when I was first asked, because I was told by the office that Yo-Yo Ma had a message for this audience, a very special one, and that Barack Obama was going to play the cello. Now, they finally straightened me out. I know it's not necessary to tell you that he was the 44th President of the United States, or that the Obama Library is going to be established on Chicago's South Side. So I think I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and tell you about our relationship when he first came to town. I believe many of you know that Barack came to Chicago after Newt Minnow's daughter Martha, who was a professor at Harvard Law School and became the dean at Harvard Law School, called her dad and told him that he should interview and should hire the brightest kid that she's ever had in her class. Now, Sidley and Austin did hire the future president. And after a few months that he was here, Newt called me and said that he'd like to bring over a remarkable, remarkable young man who had just joined their firm and who he believed was really going places. Now, if Newt had had the same ability to forecast the stock market, he'd be a multi-billionaire today. Barack became involved in community problems and state politics, and then he was talked into running for the U.S. Senate. Now, if you think back, at that time, he didn't have a ghost of a chance of either getting the Democratic nomination or prevailing in the national election. But during the times he was here in Chicago, he became very good friends with many of you in the audience, and that included my son Jim and Jim's wife Paula. So Jim and Paula decided to hold the very first fundraiser for the new candidate. They held it at the Racquet Club, and it was a terrible, windy Chicago winter night. It was just an awful evening. And because of it, the affair attracted a standing room only crowd of about 20 people. Half of them, by the way, were members of our family. I, after that, had the fun of introducing him several times to the business community because he was completely unknown. But lightning struck not once, but 3 consecutive times, and he was elected to the U.S. Senate against absolutely impossible odds. Now, a few years down the road, he was really encouraged to run for the presidency. Now, the crowds were literally standing room only due to the enthusiasm of millions and millions of people. And it was a wonderful joy just to attend one of the events. And as you know, he then made history by being elected. For 8 years, we were very proud of the man in the Oval Office. He was, and he is, the personification of honesty, decency, ability, and goodwill. And so tonight, we are privileged to hear from President Barack Obama and 2 other wonderful people, Yo-Yo Ma and our own Carol Marin.
Well, welcome home.
It's good to be back. Good to see you, Carol. Hello, everybody. And to be joined by one of my favorite people, although you're kind of making me look bad with those socks.
Well, I couldn't decide on which color. Those are great socks. And welcome home to you, Yo-Yo Ma, because this is as much your home as any other place in America.
I love Chicago. You know that.
So our assignment this evening is to discuss the state of the entire world before dinner is served at 7. So we're going to get right to it. And let's begin with this. Volodymyr Zelensky sits bravely in his office in Kyiv. He may not live through this night or this year. What do we know through him about what it might be like to be an unlikely leader, President Obama?
Well, look, when I originally agreed to come here, because of the great debt that I owe this city to people like Lester and so many people around this room who supported me, I anticipated that we would be talking about world affairs and some of the troubling trend lines that we've been seeing over the last several years. I did not anticipate that we would be witnessing an epic war taking place on continental Europe that is upending the world as we know it in real time. And so it's a somber moment. There's a sense of distraction. I think it's hard for all of us to sit here witnessing what we're witnessing happening to families, maternity wards blown up, people fleeing with their suitcases, whatever they can stuff in there in a few minutes, and millions of people displaced. And so it's a somber time. And I don't think we can sugarcoat both the human toll that is unfolding in Ukraine, but also how it is reordering the international architecture in ways that we haven't seen in decades. I will say, though, that how President Zelensky has responded, how the Ukrainian people have responded, has at least awakened the world and Europe in particular in a way that indicates how one person, a handful of people, a group of people can move the conscience of the world. And that is, I think, a useful reminder for us that what we're seeing out of the Kremlin, from Putin, from Russia, the sort of mentality of might makes right and strong men and war and bloodshed and avarice, that's as old as time. But there is another idea that believes in the intrinsic dignity of all people and believes in rule of law and international law and human rights and freedom of conscience and self-determination. And those two ideas have been competing for quite some time. And what's needed in order for the better vision to win out is people like Zelensky being willing to stand up and take enormous risks and make great sacrifices. And so if there's ever been a time in which that kind of leadership, a leadership that's grounded in a broader vision about how we should be treating each other and what democracy and freedom mean, I think this is the moment. And he's proven to be the right man at the moment, and it also indicates the degree to which you never know where they're going to come from. Because This guy won Dancing with the Stars in Ukraine
Right, right.
just a few years ago. And so if somebody who's sort of the Steve Martin of Ukraine can suddenly find their voice in a historic moment like this, that places an obligation on all of us. That means each one of us have a voice that can make a difference at any given moment. So.
And so, Yo-Yo Ma, on Monday in Washington, there you are, outside the Russian embassy. Will you take us through what your thought process was? When did you decide? And what was that decision about?
The decision happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I texted a friend to say, can you give me the address of the Russian embassy and the Ukrainian embassy? I went to the lobby of the hotel, got into a taxi, and said, could you drive me there? The taxi waited. I played. Then I got back into the taxi, went to the Ukrainian embassy, and then I played. And I think, to President Obama's point earlier about unlikely people who can change things, for me, the moment came that you had mentioned earlier, Carol, when President Zelensky said, this may be the last time you see me. In other words, he was willing to put his life on the line. He was not leaving. And he put his family also in harm's way. That's saying a lot. And I'm just wondering how many of us are able to do that. And that comes to the point that I think it's based on character. Okay, he may have been not as good a dancer as you, President Obama.
Michelle doesn't
I know,
about
I know.
his dancing.
Michelle, notwithstanding, I hear you're pretty, fleet-footed.
Yo-Yo has seen me dance, and he knows I've got game.
So, no. He doesn't need to wear these socks. He's plenty good on his feet. But I think it's character, and I have to acknowledge something that I've never said in front of anybody else. But when you made your speech in Chicago after winning the election, I thought to myself, if he asked, I would be willing to lay down my life.
I did not.
And thank God you didn't ask.
I didn't ask. I did ask him to play at the inauguration in 7-degree weather, which I don't play the cello. I'm imagining that can't be easy.
It came close. It came close. So, as you know, the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, now the Council on Global Affairs, was born in the 20s as a response to isolationism.
Right.
Now here we are in the midst of the Ukraine war, and there are people in the world wondering if, in fact, Ukraine is looking down the long barrel of the world's isolationism. Is there a new isolationism that's taken hold?
To the contrary, Carol, I think actually Ukraine has snapped the world back into attention after years of complacency. In the United States in particular, I think there is no doubt that the frustrations, the disillusionment, the heavy cost, particularly borne by our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, made people war weary, which is understandable. That's 13, 14 years of tens of billions of dollars spent and lives lost and families shattered by wounds and and just the sheer exhaustion of it. And I would witness this at Walter Reed and when I visited troops in those places. And so it is natural and proper to be wary of war, because war is a terrible thing, even when you're on the right side of it. But I also think that, people often ask me what surprised me about the United States, or what surprised me about the presidency, something I hadn't anticipated. And the truth was, long hours, gray hair, a recalcitrant Congress, those things did not surprise me. The one thing that did surprise me was the degree to which America still underwrote the world order. That even our critics expected us to behave responsibly on the world stage. And I think there came a period in which, having come out of war, or still in the midst of it, or the tail of it, there was a sense maybe we shouldn't try to solve everybody else's problems because we've got a lot of problems here at home. I think what we're seeing now is a reminder that there is a direct connection between our problems here at home and what happens overseas. It turns out that the same instincts towards authoritarianism, the same instincts of xenophobia, of us versus them, of tribalism, of division, the same manipulation of information and media, the same suppression of conscience and dissent. Those forces that in our country we've seen weaken our democracy, well, that's happening elsewhere. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to or have the capacity to police the entire world. But what it does mean is that what we stand for here and what we stand for overseas has a direct connection. And if we are willing to stand up for values like rule of law and democracy and human rights here, then we should be willing to stand up for them overseas as well. That doesn't always have to express itself through our military might. The debates back in the 20s, the 30s, about American involvement in Europe took place in a different era. We can't help but be integrated. Look at what's happening now with respect to the economy of Russia, Europe, China, the United States. They're inextricably linked. Information is flowing continuously, so that Putin can't hide what's happening in Russia. And increasingly, he can't even hide it inside of Russia. So the world has shrunk, and we're going to have obligations beyond our shores, and it will be in our self-interest to act on those values that we hold in common with people like a Zelensky. That's not always going to express itself in terms of us entering into a war. And I think that there have been times where we've had a tendency to think that the only way for us to act overseas is militarily. And in fact, if we're doing a good job engaging diplomatically and economically and culturally, then ideally, the use of our military is the last tool in the toolbox, not the first.
Yo-Yo Ma has instructed me not to call him Maestro, and I'm having a really hard time not
Go ahead.
saying it that way, because to call him Yo-Yo just seems not quite right, but I will follow his lead. Back when I was doing the news in Chicago, I would periodically in our newscast end up throwing to a story about Yo-Yo Ma is in Kenwood today. Yo-Yo Ma is in Englewood. Yo-Yo Ma is at St. Sabina's. You have made, if Chicago is not your home, your mission to reach, not for the expensive seats, but the places where the little kids are who don't get to see the Chicago Symphony, don't get to know you, and yet they know you. And this is sort of a question beyond isolationism about empathy, because it seems to me that your mission in life, if I don't misrepresent it, is to provide empathy through music. Do I have that wrong?
I can never contradict you. Of course you're right. You know, when President-elect Obama called me in backstage in Florence to say, would you like to play at my inauguration? I said, obviously, I would love to, but I just have one question for you. Did I read correctly that you thought that there was an empathy deficit in the world? And you didn't say that very often, I don't think, but you did say that, and you said you did. And to your question, Carol, I'm interested in human nature and everything that humans do, good and bad and stuff in between, and how we're also part of nature. So, what do I mean by that? You know, friend, quote, said, we are nature, and if we're disconnected from nature, we're disconnected from ourselves. And another friend used to say, nature has the greatest imagination, but she guards her secrets jealously. So we have to extract certain truths about our nature and human nature. And that's what I am fascinated by. Music is the great way to do that kind of research. And so when President Obama says culture, I feel like all of us, it's not culture with a big C in a large hall that's all very, monumental. It's culture in our everyday lives and how we actually are human, and how the best way for us to live, for me, I think, and possibly for all of us, is how we combine our head and heart and hands and use ourselves. You know, how we're trained to do great analytical thinking. But we also know that people who make great decisions actually have to go between the two neural pathways of analytical thinking and empathetic thinking. And if we can't get into the shoes of other people, we're not going to be able to make good decisions. And so that's my work. And so whether working with musicians or working with kids or older people, it's in a great city like Chicago, which has all the great neighborhoods and really has a sense of itself, the broad shoulders of Chicago. Well, yeah, because if I can understand Chicago, I can feel it in my bones, there's a greater chance for me to understand not only the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. We have a Ukrainian population here. We have the Mexican population. We have the Polish population. We have the Russian population here. And so if we can understand ourselves, the rest is pie.
So I've got to ask this. What's up with you, Bruce Springsteen?
Look, Bruce, Yo-Yo, the best perk of the presidency was I could pretty much have anybody I like over at the White House. and they would perform, and then I'd hang out, and, I generally resent them because they were more talented than me, and it seemed to be having more fun on a daily basis. But there's a reason why we did a lot of cultural programming at the White House, and it wasn't, whether it was Lin-Manuel Miranda at a poetry event explaining how he was going to do a rap about the first Treasury Secretary. And we're all like, yeah, good luck with that. I'm sure it'll. I remember Michelle and I looked at each other, it's like, man, this is going to be terrible. Or it was Bob Dylan singing songs of the civil rights movement, or Aretha coming through and singing gospel. What Yo-Yo said about Chicago, it's true. One of the things I love about this town is it is as representative of, and Illinois generally, is as representative of the country as any place. It's north, south, east, west, urban, rural, suburban. Every immigrant group has landed on our doorstep. But what's true of Chicago is true of America, right? That's our strength. We are this remarkable experiment. The only large country that, and a superpower, the most powerful country on earth, but we're also this example, this experiment in, can a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious collection of people from every corner of the globe come together under a common creed and, despite their differences, live together, work together, celebrate together, mourn together, and create a better place. And I've written this before. Even all around the world, for all our flaws, all our mistakes, all the misguided or well-intentioned but ultimately fruitless forays we've had in foreign policy, everywhere, people are still looking, thinking, can this actually work? And when it doesn't look like it's working, the world is a darker place. And those who have a different idea of how human societies can function are strengthened. And when America looks like it might be working, then that provides a glimmer of hope for people around the world. And that experiment expresses itself in a lot of ways. One of its most powerful ways is in music. Right? There's a reason why we are an exporter of culture, because there's something in people all around the world that recognize, if they can get along, if you can pull Irish ballads and African rhythms and throw in a little bit of salsa, somebody pulls in a sitar, and somehow you've got rock and roll, and you've got jazz, and you've got blues, and you've got classical, and if that can work, well, maybe there's hope for us.
But
right?
Did the boss let you play with him? I mean, how did it go?
In his barn, yeah, but those recordings have been destroyed. I will tell you a story about Yo-Yo, though, that I think is indicative of his spirit. Because the thing is, he is a joyful person and a good soul. Right? You can't help but come away with spending time with him and, of course, listening to his music and not feel slightly more hopeful about the world. You were invited to some event. We had a lot of events. I don't remember what it was. But there was the way the White House is structured, there's the East Room and the State Room and all kinds of rooms and the Plate Room. I don't name them right. I was the worst tour guide of the White House because I didn't always get the terminology right. But there's a big hall. You kind of walk in from the north entrance. And a lot of times that's where we have receptions. And the president has this Marine band. And they're really good. And they can play anything. I mean, they're top notch. And these are folks they're Marines. And they're serving our country. But they are also extraordinary musicians. And so Yo-Yo was supposed to perform, and I think he actually had performed, and so his performance was over, and now you've got like a little trio playing just while everybody's chatting. And I'm talking with some muckety-mucks, and I look over, and Yo-Yo, suddenly he's just sat down, and he's with a woman Marine, I think maybe on violin, and you've got a African-American Marine, and you've got, a bald white guy Marine, and Yo-Yo sitting there, and they're just jamming, as if, they're like the house band. And he didn't, first of all, I thought what an extraordinary experience that would be for them to play with a master of Yo-Yo's stature. But it also was a reflective of America at its best, which is you can play music, sit down, right? We don't check to see what your credentials were, what your status was supposed to be. If you can jam, let's play some music together. And that, I think, was indicative of not just Yo-Yo's spirit or those Marines, but it was also America at its best. That's what we do.
The only thing I can say to that is sometimes you don't know where your next job is coming from.
Did they know who you were at the Russian embassy? Did they know who you were at the Ukrainian embassy?
No.
You didn't call and say, I'm coming over?
I had a mask on, and, there are a lot of Asian cellists.
Good point.
Generic.
We know that President Obama is the hope guy, but I'm just curious, as we round this out before we hope we can persuade you to play for us, where do you get your hope? How do you keep it alive in an America that can test it, that business of hope from time to time?
By talking to ordinary people everywhere and finding out what their stories are. I mean, it's, we all say we have heroes and models and this, true. But actually, if you go around anywhere, into any neighborhood, and you start to figure out what people's stories are and what they do in their daily lives, and if you're a single mother with 3 kids, and my daughter has 3 kids, I know what it's like to have, 3 little kids running around. But if you're a single mom, and you have to actually put food on the table, and you see what kind of heroism is involved. And I just think the heroes are everywhere. And when you see that kind of energy, and when you see people pulling together, there's a fire, there's a new neighbor comes in, this thing that you call America, this experiment, and I love the word that you used, experiment, because it is an ongoing experiment. We're not proving anything. We have to prove it every single day in order for this experiment to work. And you see these families and people that are actually pulling things together in order to make it work in the small towns and the big towns, city blocks, urban areas, and it's beyond social demographics.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And that's beautiful. That's where the hope comes from. And yes, you get hope when Zelensky comes and says, you know, I'm putting my life on the line. And suddenly we all pull together and say, yeah, we've been very comfortable. We haven't thought about this, but someone is actually doing it. And it makes us sit up a little straighter.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
And I want to pick up on something he says, because you mentioned, Lester mentioned, we're building the Obama Presidential Center here.
Will you invite me,
Yes,
please?
yes. We're going to put you to work.
I want to.
I know.
To work.
The entire premise of our programming is exactly what Yo-Yo just said. You know what? I came first to Chicago as a community organizer. And what I learned from working out in the neighborhoods of the South Side was everybody's got a story. And those stories are sacred. And if you take the time to hear them, you will see the quiet heroism that people are living out every single day. And you'll also see the connections between people. And when I asked myself what was the most important thing I could do post-presidency, it was, how do we train a whole new generation of leaders? Not leaders who necessarily run for Congress, doesn't have to be folks who are holding high office, but people who are working every day in their communities to build bridges, to make connections, to be helpful, to express kindness through action, to make our institutions more responsive, to live out our values. And it turns out that if you ask me what gives me hope, all across this country, there are young people doing that right now, as we speak, often without a lot of fanfare. And this generation coming behind us is as thoughtful, idealistic, innovative, bold as any generation. They're certainly smarter and more sophisticated than my generation. We've taught them to be cynical about some of our existing institutions, big government, big media, big politics, big business. But when given a chance, they are prepared to remake those institutions to to better reflect the values that we believe in. And what turns out to be true in the United States is true overseas. So in addition to the thousands of young people that we're training here in the United States, the hundreds we're working with here in Chicago, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, same cohorts, and I'd meet them when I was traveling around the world. We'd always have town hall meetings with young leaders. Right now, as we speak, we have alumni of our programming in Europe that includes a woman who's partially blind, who, in Ukraine, who organized one of the foremost disabilities movements in Ukraine, who had to flee from her home with her 15-year-old son for the Romanian border. And the reason she was able to leave Ukraine was because another leader in Romania, who's a human rights and pro-democracy activist, contacted her and arranged it. They had met together in programmings that we had done. We've got young people in Amsterdam and Germany, including the youngest member of the legislature in Germany who went through our programs, who are setting up refugee housing as we speak. And when you listen and hear what they are doing and the courage and conviction with which they're doing it, that'll make you hopeful. And the question is, how do we create platforms and structures to give them the training, the support, the resources, so that their voices are heard? Because if we can clear a path for them, they will save us. I believe the views of Putin will ultimately lose. I believe that that impulse inside all of us to bully our way through problems and to put people down, to lift ourselves up, and to be fearful and resentful towards others and suspicious of people who don't look like us or think the way we do. I believe that ultimately that vision will lose, but only if what a pretty good politician from Illinois called the better angels by nature is lifted up. And as Yo-Yo said, that is not something we can just do occasionally. All of us in our lives, every single day, have to contribute to lifting up those voices, and that's what we're trying to do with the foundation. That's what Yo-Yo does with his music. That's what you've done in the past, Carol, with your good reporting, and there are a lot of people here who are doing it through all kinds of charitable and civic activities, but we got to pick up our game if we're going to ultimately not just deliver for the people of Ukraine, but for our children and our grandchildren.
On that note, let's give a warm thank you to President
Good to
Obama
see everybody.
and
Good to
Yo-Yo
be
Ma.
home. Thank you.
And we will persuade. Can we? So are we going to? We're going to get you. Stay right there.
Hello, everyone. My name is not Bruce Springsteen. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'd like to play for you a musical version of what we just heard President Obama and Carol speak about the last half hour. So I'd like to start by playing for you the Ukrainian national anthem. And followed by things that you would immediately know because they're tunes that you know: Simple Gifts, Amazing Grace, and Coming Home, theme from Dvorak, who came to Chicago in 1893, 29 years before the founding of this great organization, and who taught his students not to imitate him, but to listen. Just as President Obama said, to listen to every music that they hear, whether it's African Americans, spirituals, Native Americans, Polish music, immigrant music, and Dvorak students taught their students in the same way. So, therefore, we have as his grand students Duke Ellington, George Gershwin, Aaron Copland. And that's the America, I think, that we were talking about that gives hope. It's from listening to one another. But first, the Ukrainian national anthem. Thank you. Happy birthday. Have a great, great evening. Wonderful celebration. And may there be a lot of hope in the council, in Chicago, and all over the world. Bye-bye.
Please welcome to the stage Jenny Scanlon, Centennial Co-Chair, Chicago Council on Global Affairs, President and Chief Executive Officer, UL Inc.
Thank you. And I think I speak for all of us that just left me breathless. Thank you so much to President Obama, to Yo-Yo Ma, and to Carol Maureen for being with us tonight. They left us with stories of inspiration, stories of hope, and messages for all of us at the Council as we pivot to our second century. Now, as Ivo mentioned earlier, when the Council was founded 100 years ago in 1922, Chicago was a provincial hotbed of isolationism. In fact, that's why we were founded, to challenge that sentiment. By the 1980s, however, Chicago was on its way to becoming the outward-looking global city that we know today. There are many reasons for this broadening of the city's horizons, but those of you who have read Richard Longworth's book will appreciate the critical role of the city's business community. As the world economy globalized, the city's multinational corporations, many of whom are represented in this room tonight. These multinational corporations built global operations that radiated out from the city to almost every part of the globe. And this radiance created amongst the city's business leaders and young professionals a community of globally minded people for whom the Council has become the natural home for curiosity. And in time, many of these participants became supporters and leaders of this great organization. Now, the Chicago business community's investment in the Council over the years has been an investment in Chicago as a nexus for people, cultures, ideas, and capital from all over the world. And tonight, we'd like to thank those corporate supporters, those individual donors, and foundation partners who believed and continue to believe in this vision. I would also like to thank all of you who have supported the Second Century campaign and this centennial. Your gift allows us to build momentum as we celebrate our 100th anniversary and move into this second century. Now, you've played a critical role in securing the future of the Council, and we are grateful. And as President Obama said, we all need to contribute to the future. And I'm thrilled to announce the sum of the contributions of this room. Your efforts have helped raise an additional $3.7 million. And that $3.7 million contributes to the Second Century campaign and centennial celebration that has totaled $28.6 million, which gets us this close to our campaign goal of $35 million. So I do hope if you have not yet contributed to the campaign, you will take a moment to do so. And I'd like to close out now before dinner to thank my fellow co-chairs this evening, Don Cook, Lester Crown, John Edelson, Faye Hartog-Levin, Chris Keogh, Margot Pritzker, Sam Scott, and David Vitale. Each of these individuals have worked so hard to put together such a beautiful event in honor of the Council that we all so love, and we're just so thrilled that this campaign has been so successful. Now, please enjoy your dinner. Bon appetit.
Thank you all once again for joining us for this wonderful evening of reflection and celebration. I will be brief in my remarks, as I understand I am all that stands between you and getting to go home this evening. So on behalf of the Council's Board of Directors, I wish to extend my gratitude to our honorees this evening, President Obama and Yo-Yo Ma, as well as Carol Marin, for joining us and sharing how we, collectively, can address the many global challenges we face. Thank you also, of course, to our supporters and our Second Century campaign donors who have made an investment not only in the Council's future, but in the future of Chicago as a vibrant, outward-looking global city. Your generosity and the generosity of many donors who could not be here today built the Council we know today. I also want to thank Ivo, Marshall, and John for their leadership of this organization. You each faced unique challenges and rose to the occasion every time during social, financial, and political shifts and the pandemic. And of course, Lester, you were our longest-standing chair. You, Renee, and your family have played such a big role in who we are today. Thank you. Today, we turn the page on the Council's history, so beautifully chronicled by Dick Longworth, and conclude the Council's first century. As we look towards the second century, I will close this program on a hopeful note. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs is no longer our secret. The pandemic wrought hardships the world over, but for the Council, going virtual with our programming, we attracted larger and more diverse audiences than ever before. The existence of hybrid and virtual venues where leaders and the public convene to discuss critical global issues has inspired our growth, differentiation, and scale. EVO is leading us forward with what we are calling the digital transformation of the Council. Our second century will call on our responsibility to continue our innovation and dedication to fostering inclusive forums and platforms for all voices to come together. We will do that in Chicago, and we will do that for the public all over the world. So I call on each of you to help support this transformation. You can scan the QR code. Pre-pandemic, did anybody know what a QR code was? On the back of your program to direct you on how to support the Council. Hey, I'm board chair, it's my job to ask. As our honorees so eloquently articulated, change is possible when people reach across divides, build trust, and lead with empathy. Thanks to you all, the Council is in a strong position to continue a century's legacy of building trust and awareness between communities and across boundaries. We need this now more than ever. We look forward to beginning the next chapter. Thank you, and good night.